think arguably this was one of the most engaging conversations because the discussion was quite thought-provoking. And I remember one of the things that Abu mentioned. He spoke about how we need to start educating people from the grassroots level. Many of us in school were made to understand that there was a Mombasa conference somewhere in the 1960s to let us understand that what the Europeans brought to us was to help us memorize. So they did not teach us to be able to use our hands to develop something, but they came to teach us 1 + 1, which is 2. And over the years, we continue to teach our children 1 + 1, which is 2. But we've not been able to find out why 1 + 1 is 2. If you are able to find the answer why 1 + 1 is 2, then probably we'll be making headway. And I think that one of the things we must begin to consider is also to look at the possibility of restructuring our educational system that would take us beyond just memorizing what we study and to becoming more of technocrats. We move on now, and we are going to be talking about climate change, which is quite an interesting area. Climate change is having a growing impact on the African continent, hitting the most vulnerable hardest, and contributing to food insecurity, population displacement, and stress on water resources. Devastating foods, locust invasion, and drought pose serious climate risk for the continent. This has increased calls for African nations to commit a transition to cleaner energy. So how can African nations pursue a just energy transition and climate change strategy that speaks to the realities of the continent? And we are going to be having a keynote address that will be delivered, but let me invite Madam Gloria, who is the head of PR for the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology and Innovation, to do us the honors of introducing the representative of the minister to give us a keynote address. Madam Gloria, thank you.
Thank you so much, Muftau. It's been an interesting session since morning, and I'm so grateful that you were here when the Honorable Minister opened the session. I'm sorry to announce that we are unable to do the panel discussion, that everyone is looking forward to the carbon credit market, every other thing that we've done from COP26 to COP27 that will lead into COP28. However, I will make time and do that some other time. But then I would like to request that the Honorable Minister's rep is from the Environmental Protection Agency, Dr. Henry Kokofu. I'd like to request him to join us to do the delivery on behalf of the Honorable Minister from SD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, you've been welcomed already, so I need not. Most probably, I need to be welcomed. But I'm happy and grateful to the organizers for giving me the opportunity, even though this is for my sector minister, coming from Environmental Protection Agency. We are very fortunate to be part of this year's Africa Economic Summit. You've been already told that Ghana is the home of the Secretariat of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. This is a notorious fact, and it is critical for attaining a climate-resilient continent and a just energy transition. Let us do a little bit of juggling with figures by way of reminding ourselves that our continent, Africa, is home to about 1.3 billion people and consists of 54 independent countries. It is known for its rich history, culture, and traditions. The continent is one of the lowest contributors to climate change. Yet, key development sectors of Africa have already experienced widespread losses and damages due to their vulnerability to the effects of climate change. And I think this is something no one can contest. The impact of climate change in Africa is evident in the increasing frequency and severity of extreme weather events, including rainfall variability, floods, droughts, and heat waves. These events devastate human lives, poverty, and infrastructure, particularly in vulnerable communities, leading to lack of food, water, starvation, and malnutrition. And recently, escalation of security situations, particularly within the West African enclave. Having said all this, I would love to strike a difference and then also to secure some kind of similarities with our colleagues' countries from the other side of the world. And in this case, I would like to do so in the context of Climate Vulnerable Forum, CVF. This is a group of nations, about 54 countries, also representing about 1.4 billion people on the globe. And these countries come from mainly Africa, the Caribbean, the Pacific, Asia, and the Middle East. So we have Bangladesh, we have Sri Lanka, we have the least developed states, particularly the island states, and all others coming together to form the CVF. These are countries that recognize or has been recognized to be highly vulnerable to climate change effects. So you strike the similarities, the fate of Africa and the fate of these group of countries that has come together. For some reasons, coincidentally also, the CVF leadership rotates 2 years among member countries. And this year, since last year and this year, Ghana hosts the presidency. So President Nana Addo Dankwa Kokofu, President of the Republic of Ghana, is also chair of the CVF. And for good reasons, my good self, who is the Executive Director of Environmental Protection Agency, I represent him as the Special Presidential Envoy. So we've been dealing with these countries on South-South cooperation, all towards finding ways to deal with the climate situations within our sector. In addition to these challenges, we know that climate change worsens existing social and economic inequalities in Africa. So to the extent that vulnerable populations, including and notably women and children, are affected by the impacts of climate change. They often have limited access to resources, information, and decision-making power, leaving them to more exposed to the effects of the climate change. Having given all this background, I'm here to introduce myself properly. I am to deliver the keynote address for and on behalf of my sector minister, who you had the opportunity to encounter this morning. And the address focuses on climate change and just energy transition, which way forward, the strategy for Africa. That will definitely or expectedly leads to Africa's sustainable development that will enhance its resilience to climate change impacts. So when you juxtapose to the objectives of the CVF, the Climate Vulnerable Forum, we're saying that it's about time we move away from vulnerability to resilience and eventually to prosperity. So the transition also occurs there. Yes, we are vulnerable. So should we remain there? The answer is no. We have got to move to a point where we will be resilient. I mean, we have a robust systems, both economic and social systems, through climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies. And these feeds into the energy transition things that we're talking about. It is quite interesting that in this era of fighting climate change, energy provision and energy development has become, or is being put in the dock. It's stand accused. Far back, during the Industrial Revolution, where the global north decided to go on industrialization pathway, it was energy that propelled that agenda. And at that time, energy was exploited from coal, from fossil fuels, and from all other sources. And nobody then thought of dirty energy. So they used all these to industrialize and then to make their economies rich. Today, after 100 to 200 years on, today, we are being told that these energy sources that propelled the development of the Western North or the global North is no more good. So we have got to move away from. That's the irony of fate. Just because Ghana has struck oil, Nigeria is producing oil. So we are being told that there should be a transition. We should move away from that. Why? Because of climate change. And what caused climate change? Greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide, methane, and all that. What brought them? It's industrialization. And who orchestrated industrialization? It is the global north, the rich countries. Indeed, together, they pollute around 96%, whilst Africa in total produces, or developing countries produces less than 4% of greenhouse gases that has caused climate change. So the lower emitters are the heavy sufferers, whilst the heavy emitters are the least sufferers. That's again an irony of destiny. The energy sector is a major contributor to most African economies and simultaneously a significant contributor to climate change. Most countries in the continent are blessed with mineral resources, including oil and gas, and here Nigeria comes in mind. These resources are important for the rapid and transformational development of the continent. Therefore, any attempt to prevent the use of these resources for the continent's development must be made carefully and strategically. It is important to note that Africa also has a comparative advantage in transitioning to low-carbon energy sources such as renewable energy, i.e. solar, wind, and hydropower, and nuclear power. The constraint here is technology, and then the capital to fund these renewable sources. The energy sector can also promote energy efficiency measures and adopt clean technologies in industries, transportation, and buildings, reducing energy consumption and greenhouse gas emissions. However, to ensure a smooth transition to a low-carbon economy, we must ensure that any transition is fair, equitable, and inclusive. This shift in paradigm must recognize that transitioning to a sustainable energy system can have significant social and economic impacts, particularly on vulnerable communities and workers in high carbon intensive industries. This also brings us to a very important data with the Climate Vulnerable Forum countries. The 54 countries together have lost $525 billion over the last 2 decades through climate-induced catastrophes. And what it means is that the flooding, the droughts, or other things that climate change brings about have caused considerable damage to the economies of these countries to that tune of amount. Interestingly, these countries put together, their external debt is $500 billion. That's 500 billion. So you can equate the loss and damage that has caused to the economies of these countries to the debt, the external debt that these countries have. So if we are to have no climate-induced catastrophes, we might have as well also not be owing or not be debt-ridden. So debt sustainability and debt relief has a very, very linkage with climate change and their issues. And we are saying that energy is key if we are to develop our economies and our societies. And the other hand, we are to fight climate change by transitioning from this so-called dirty energy, fossil fuels and coal and others, so we can have a cleaner quality air that will be devoid of the greenhouse gases, particularly carbon dioxide. A comprehensive and just energy transition strategy for Africa must consider the continent's unique social, economic, and environmental challenges. Engaging all stakeholders, including government, civil society, the private sector, the local communities, is critical to designing and implementing a climate change and just energy transition strategy for Africa. The strategy must be based on sound scientific evidence and reflect the needs and aspirations of all members of societies. Ghana has developed an energy transition plan that lays out a plan for decarbonizing the energy sector and reaching net zero emissions by 2070, while ensuring socioeconomic growth and the use of Ghana's natural resources. The plan has just transition as a key objective to ensure its successful implementation. And an important aspect of this transition plan is how Ghana can ensure that we do not end up with stranded assets, but that the current energy resources are used wisely to secure future investments for a transition. And here is very key. We're talking about exploitation and the use of natural resources to better the lives of the people, develop resilient economies, and then build social, stable social economies as well, just as our colleagues at the Global North have done. And they have employed the economic Kushner's curve that he developed for economic development. So you start from ground zero and then you end up. So the environmental Kushner's curve is so simple. You exploit your natural resources, being it gold. I heard one of the panelists very, very much averse with mining. Can you blame him? Because it comes with degradation. So exploiting your oil, and apologies to my colleagues from Nigeria, the tragedy at Delta, Niger Delta, the Sarawiwa case. Forgive me for reminding you a very bad story. These days, you exploit the natural resources, and you are degrading the environment. So as you exploit and you degrade, you get to a point, optimum, where you have optimal revenue coming in, income. So then you plow back some of the revenue to correct the degradation. So you come to point zero where you have exploited the resources, developed the society and your economy and everything, but have managed to also repair the damage so caused to the environment. That is environmental Kushner's curve. That's all it is. So developed countries have just taken this pathway. Simplicity. What are we experiencing in Africa? We have a straight curve, straight line. So our curve is just straight. We are exploiting and degrading and moving on with no end in sight. So there's even no money. We don't get the needed revenue, just as our colleague said, in order to even plow back to repair. So if there's any strategy, if there's anything, this is the way to go. It is difficult to say that you will not exploit the natural resources. You have got to, but strategic thinking must go in there. As much as you are exploiting, mindful of the environmental damage and all that, you must have the funds and the money available to repair the damage to square zero. That is the difference between developed and developing nations. So where do we want to go as Africa? And we've said that Ghana believes that as Africans, we can share such experiences and learn from each other on this subject. That's South-South cooperation. We can further leverage opportunities presented by the Africa Continental Free Trade Area as an example. We can develop green hydrogen as a continent for export. And this is a very gray area. Very, very important resource that we can tap in. Though joint programming and trade, through joint programming and trade, we can increase economies of scale and achieve a more effective energy transition that is equitable and just to our continent. As I cruise to closure, I would like to say that Africa can transition to a low-carbon economy by leveraging our God-given natural resources, especially in renewables, and working together to develop economies of scale for this transition. And since the world order moved from cornucopianism to conservationism, protectionism, to sustainability, we in Africa must be able to work our way through and get disentangled from this web of escalating poverty, conflict, and all others, which you cannot leave effects of climate change out. But I also learned this evening that much depends on us, the participation of the private sector, the attitude of the average African must change. We must eschew selfishness, greediness, political patronage, and be truthful to our people and to God. I appreciate the opportunity to speak at this summit. I urge all stakeholders to continue their efforts in addressing the climate change challenge in Africa by working together, prioritizing the needs of vulnerable communities, and remaining committed to a just energy transition strategy. We can build a brighter, sustainable future for the continent. May God help us. Thank you for your audience. Thank you very much.